So very quickly, Kevin Epley is the head women's coach at South Carolina. He's been there since 2012, was the ITA Coach of the Year at Division I Women last year. Before that, he's been the head coach at Fresno State, head coach at William and Mary. He's coached on the WTA Tour, worked with Billie Jean King on the US Fed Cup team. If you haven't heard my podcast with Coach Epley, I encourage you to do so. It's called Bagels and Baguettes. And then Josh has been at South Carolina as the head coach since 2010. He was an outstanding player at Clemson, went on through a pro career, played on the ATP Tour for about 5 years, got up to about 120 in doubles, 400 in singles, thereabouts. He started his college coaching career at Arizona State, working for Sheila McInerney on the women's side, and then moved over to Duke, working with Ramsey Smith. And then, like I said, joined South Carolina in 2010. It's been doing great things there ever since. So I could go on and on for days with these guys, but we'll just keep pushing forward. So Kevin, Josh, welcome. Kevin, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay, and we'll get the questions started from my end, and then we'll pass it over to the coaches from there. So Kevin, the title of this webinar is Player Development and Practice Planning. So I want to start with the practice planning side of things and get a sense of how you go about your process for planning practice, how you adapt on the day, how you evaluate how a practice is going, things of that nature. If you can share your thoughts on that, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. First of all, I came in 2012, and as you mentioned, Josh was already there 2010, and he and I have sort of collaborated together. It's been a really good working relationship. Everybody has strengths and weaknesses, and we've been able to help each other. Been a very fluid communication between both programs. So it sort of has an academy feel at times. And in a lot of ways, I think our programs kind of merged. There's a lot of similarities between both programs, how we run things, and obviously there's some differences too. But I'll tackle that problem from my perspective. Is when I came in 2012, I had been out of college tennis for about 5 years, and my objective was to sort of create something that would become a segue from junior players to ITF players, because that's where I'd spent the 5 years in the interim when I got out of college tennis, and sat down in a summer and kind of put together a plan for everything that I wanted to get across to the team over the course of a year, and literally thought through every single practice, spent about a month, all of the concepts I wanted to get across to the team. We have a doubles plan. So that's very specific. That starts with server's partner, goes through server, returner's partner, returner. We have practice rules, practice concepts. So what I did was basically planned out every day. It was kind of a macro view, and said, what do I want to achieve by November, by the end of the fall? Well, we want to have all the kids know what it is to be a Gamecock, sort of the cultural elements of being a Gamecock, the things that you'll have to do when you come to our school, and the things that will be here when you leave, and the supporting philosophies. And then from a kind of team practice scenarios, kind of break down things from day one in a progressive manner. So the first thing would be the first day of practice is going to be sort of practice rules. What do you have to do when you get on a court to be a Gamecock? And then the next day we would get into a concept, we call it core fundamentals, and how to do short court, what your contact points should be, preparation, how to address the ball, positioning, core fundamentals. Next few days we get into consistency. Next few days we get into intensity, building from the day before, and that goes all the way throughout the fall. We have transition, we have defense, we have offense, we have patterns, how to attack, and basically the idea there is that we would build through, like, let's take defense, for example. So we would have a defense week, maybe it's week 4. I'd have a folder that would have defensive skills, a defensive presentation that we would talk to the team about, maybe some defensive videos. Then we would have sort of our defensive progression, which would roughly run something like toss ball, a closed system, thinking about my side of the court. We talk about that a lot, my side of the court or the other side of the court, where we're working on technique, we're working on footwork, and slowly from there, we start moving to the other side of the court. We get out of the toss ball scenario, get somebody on the other side of the court, and we start opening up the drill with stipulations, maybe a corner box, where they're trying to create objectives, and the focus shifts from my side of the court to the other side of the court. We call that external cueing, and what the objectives are, and then we keep opening the drills up until they become they move into a set of competitive defensive drills that we use. So we would do that for every concept, and by the end of it all, we get into what we call the cauldron. And basically, when you come out to a practice, after we've run through all of the instruction or the syllabus, if you will, you come out to the courts and say, February, you're going to have a defense drill, a defensive competition, a transition competition, a serve +1 competition, returns, and so on. And we try to run through all of the skills over the course of a practice. And we'll do that in a competitive manner where the kids are competing against each other, and they get scored daily. And we call that the cauldron. My former assistant and I, Jeff Navolo, who's now the head coach at SMU, developed this, where we would score the kids each day, and they come in the next day and find out where they're ranked in the overall in the overall standings. And so that we keep that competitive spirit going. So that's roughly what the syllabus looks like. It's all planned out, and I have every practice recorded since 2012. So basically, when the incoming class comes in, I just grab the folders. There's not a whole lot of planning that goes on, and we just move through our program. The other thing I would say, and I think Josh and I have taken this this pretty seriously over the last 2 years, is the concept of recovery, not working the kids too hard. We both use the first beat system. We use 4-to-1 ratios. We will bust them really hard 1 day a week. And when I say hard, I mean really hard. And they know what day that is. And that would not be the day that we are going to be spending a lot of time focused on, objectives and talking through things. And so, and that's the day where we're just grinding. And if you're familiar with first beat, we would try to get between a 4 and a 5 in training load, Tremp scores over 180. And then we're gonna recover the next day. We're gonna get more into specific conversations and skill work, maybe technique, discussions. So we'd only work really, really hard 1 day a week. And if there are questions about that, I can answer that later. I'm going to turn this over to Josh. Next question, just a second. The one other thing I would say is the idea of, this idea of, first of all, the competition itself. People have some concerns about, on the women's side, of girls competing. And we find that if you compete enough and you build out a communication structure where you're meeting with them all the time, the way college tennis has gone with student athlete welfare and so on, where it used to be an authoritarian model in a lot of ways, hey, do this, this is our program, has now moved, at least in our program, to a cooperative model. So when we make demands on the kids, we're not punishing them, but we're spending time discussing with them why. And so we have meetings before every practice about what the expectations are, how to handle competition, and we come up with sort of a team agreement of how we're going to go through the day. So we'll meet for 15, 20 minutes before every practice and really try to build out the communication between the coaching staff and the girls so that they can communicate to us what their concerns are. But when we leave the room, we all have an agreement of how we're going to attack the day and what the expectations are for the day. That's been a real valuable part of our programming as well. So I think overall, I mean, that's kind of a rough run through how we do things. I mean, as college coaches, there's no real blueprint. We're kind of thrown into this. We have to invent our own ways. That's sort of how we've approached it. And I'd be happy to answer any more questions about it as we progress.
Yeah, Kevin, I mean, I have lots of follow-up questions, but I'll leave that to the coaches and let them ask the follow-up questions. So coaches, if you want to start typing questions into the question box now, you can, just to follow up with some of Kevin's points there, and we can get to them shortly. But Josh, quickly, do you have anything to add to that? I know you guys work closely together, which is really cool to see, and I wish more programs did join forces like you guys have done. But Josh, any other questions on that or points on that?
The only thing I'd add on that is just is the workload ratio. You know, everything is built from, I build my year out the entire year, going from NCAA's, you know, where we want to be peaking at that time and working all the way back. The falls for us are very developmental, just as Kevin's are. I mean, it's a very similar model in that sense. But one thing that's helped me out quite a bit as a coach is having like an objective metric basically to gauge workload, right? So the first beat has been amazing for me as a coach, where I just want to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. Yet the heart rate system has allowed me to really understand how big the days are, and that 4-to-1 ratio has been key for us as well. Injuries have been almost minimal just because of that over the years, over the last 3 or 4 years since we've really implemented that. And planning for me as a coach has been extremely helpful. That's something that Kevin's helped me out with, really going from a macro view and then all the way down. I mean, I have every day planned for the entire year, you know, and I have all the practices in my head on the computer as well, the same kind of similar way. But the idea, my objectives, or the phases that I want to take the team into are all planned out. And then the intensity of each day, of what day in the week is going to be super intense, followed by a medium day, and we need an ultra light day, and that's fixing in your components with your strength trainer, your physio, and everybody has to be on the same page on that macro plan. And then from there, you have to be able to adapt, right? And that on a daily basis. And that has to do with, there's going to be days as a coach where you get in there and your team is just juiced and ready to go, and you've got a light workload. And then at that point, you have to weigh a few things. Where are we in competition? Do we have enough recovery time if I go big again? Because the guys are going, they're going at each other's throats in competition. They're 100% locked in, and those days are really far and few between when the whole entire team's involved in that. You want to make the most of it. So at that point, you have to pivot and adapt, right? And so from there, you can do that, and then you just got to kind of work out the rest of your schedule from there. So, but the benefit of the planning for an entire year is it keeps you on track as a developer. Like, it really does. It keeps things organized for you. It keeps you on track. For me as a coach, I get so excited about seeing guys make gains, and when I see them sometimes get their first little bit of it, and really, you know, and to start to consolidate something, I want to go on to the next thing. And that's how you can ruin a progression very quickly. And so methodically, unemotionally planning something out when you're not around the team in the summer prior will ultimately let you progress at probably a pretty good rate, almost to a point where my guys get bored with certain phases. And then at that point, I'm willing to move on. And that to me has really helped me as a coach. So that's pretty much the only thing I would add on that. We, like Kevin said, we shoot stuff off of each other every day. We're in each other's office and asking each other about this and this, and what, you know, I saw a drill he was doing, and you know, tell me the thoughts behind it. What are you trying to achieve? What are the levels of it? And on and on. So it's been a phenomenal relationship, and most of what we do is very similar, obviously tailored towards the men's side and women's side.
Brilliant. And just coaches as well. I know Josh and Kevin, you guys have worked with Paul Drake in the past, and understanding kind of that recovery methodology and how to use heart rate. He's actually going to be on a webinar this time next week. So coaches, if you want to learn more about that, make sure you sign up for that if you're want to get more thoughts around this area that Kevin and Josh are really basing their year and practices and weeks off. So, Josh, just one last question from me about, we talked about practice planning now onto the player development side of things. So, as a former coach myself and player, I mean, I remember even in juniors, there was players that were working harder than me, for sure, but they seemed to be kind of get stuck in the mud a little bit, and for whatever reason, they just weren't developing, whether it was athletically or mentally or something else. They just couldn't seem to have all that hard work pay off. And then when I moved into coaching, same thing. There's players that great attitudes, working really hard, but they just seem to have kind of reached their ceiling of potential. Have you had similar experiences, and how do you kind of approach coaching those players when you have a sense that they've maybe reached their ceiling?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of us have had that type of player, and also the players that just keep on working and keep on getting better, and they go level after level. For the players, there's a physical component that's obviously attached to that, right? And it's all relative according to the physical ability of a player. That physical ability, whether on the men's side, we have quite a few kids that are just starting to fill in their bodies, and there's a lot of room to grow starting from an 18-year-old kid, right? Some kids are coming in almost fully mature, and at that point, that's their body, right? That's what they're bringing to the table. And so you got the work ethic, you got the determination, their body's already filled in, their body's already there. There's only so much more room they can go physically, but I'm going to segue this question into kind of my whole philosophy as far as developer is, there's a lot of room left to grow, and it's not on the physical side. Most kids that are coming into college, that's all they've been doing. They've been developing their technical skills. They've been taking care of their physical skills. I mean, that's what junior development is all about, right? It's movement to the ball, recovery. It's about learning the proper techniques from the ground up, leveraging the ground. Some are more developed than others, but at the same time, that's only part of the game. That's just a tool set of the game. And so, but the most underdeveloped part of an athlete that we see coming in is the mentality, the professional mentality, the understanding of how to actually grow as an athlete. And that is where the ceiling comes from, right? The ceiling comes from, there's a frustration when kids feel that I'm not progressing at the rate that I am used to, and I'm not getting all of that low-hanging fruit that I'm used to. And I think that's where the coach has to come in and say, look, first off, we need to talk to you about development. We need to tell you about the actual progression. And now that you are kind of getting to this area and all the low-hanging fruit is gone, there's still fruit up in that tree, but you just got to develop a plan on how you're going to get there. It takes a little more planning, and it takes a lot more intention behind what you're doing. And so then we have to analyze what fruit's left in the tree, where the most fruit is in that tree, and then now we're going to get a plan and we're going to go after that. And that's the first thing you do as a coach when they come in, is you start figuring out what's the biggest bang for your buck that you can get with that kid right off the bat. And most of it, like Kevin talked about, is practice standards. You got to teach these kids the practice standards, the proper way to warm up, the proper way to approach certain things. And that's really developed all through your culture, right, in a program. And that's a massive part of it. Your culture provides a standards and environment for a kid to flourish. If they bring the determination and they bring that motivation on their own, at that point, they're going to have this honeymoon phase where they're going to just immediately rise, and levels will be had. So that's where the low-hanging fruit is grasped again in a college setting. And then you got to say, you have to have that communication setting that Kevin's very good at, and meet with your players and talk to them and say, hey, just a heads up, we've given you the path of every player that's ever played this game is going to hit these very basic fundamental benchmarks as a player. And so you're not privy to jumping those or going around them. You have to go through them. Now, the average player will quit here because it's uncomfortable. And that's when all the low-hanging fruit is gone. And then now it's, you have to become a little more determined, a little more decisive, and a little more intentional about what you're doing, and really make sure that every ball counts and every practice counts, and you are very, very dedicated to that one segment and going up and getting that part of that tree. And so if you do that, and you almost reframe it for a kid and say, you are now privy to the next part of the game. Whereas the majority of the people that pick up a tennis racket will never, ever come close to that, where you get to now hone your skills mentally, become a champion, that champion mindset that's constantly going around the internet. There's a lot of people out there speaking about it. All the great athletes, There's all these common fundamentals, and there's a lot of ways to do that, but you can open up that, and then you can get into the mental side, right? And from there, once you create a competitive fun foundation for a kid, the understanding that tennis is not about just strokes, it's about managing yourself first and foremost, and being able to regulate yourself and getting you to perform at an optimal level. And then it's an external situation when you're playing the guy across the net. And that is a whole new world. And if you can create that for a player, what ends up happening is that they look at everything, just hitting the ball and warming up, and everything has a much different meaning. So it's a very new perspective for the player to look through. And now the ceiling's gone because it's a whole new perspective, and everything is getting filed in different places in their mind, and a new player is being formed, and they start feeling almost like a rebirth at that point. So there's an excitement, there's a motivation that comes behind that, and they start tackling it one after another. And jobs as coaches is you have to keep throwing things in front of your players to tackle. You've got to give them the next one. Before they get there, you got to be able to tell them what's coming, and this is what you're going to have to tackle soon, so get ready for it mentally. And that's going to come how, it could come in the next 2 weeks, or it could come in the next 4 months. We don't know. But this is the next hurdle, the major hurdle. And so keep your eyes open for it and look for it. At that point, it keeps their mind and their eyes looking forward as far as a development situation. And they're driving that car. You're not having to push. And ultimately, when it's, I think the ceiling is only there if the mentality is not right. So I don't believe that necessarily there might be a ceiling in a broad sense, but yes, physically there's always obviously capabilities of some people have more or less.
Hey, thanks for that, Josh. Well, look, we'll dive into the coaches' questions, and then Kevin, if we have time, maybe we'll see if you have anything to add there. But I'm conscious that we have a lot of coaches on the line here, and so maybe we'll start with Kevin. How many days per week do you have your players play challenge matches?
Challenge matches are once a week. That's going to be on Saturday. We call that garnet and black. Typically, they're going to have stipulations. We use a lot of court markers. A good example of that would be, just a real simple example would be, I find that a lot of the girls have a hard time hitting a T serve for a second serve on the deuce side. So we'll have them play, we'll set up we call them slap, your court marker, about 1.5 feet from the center tee, and they've got to hit all second serves into that marker. The point doesn't count. Something like that. But that would be, we always have stipulations, but we do actual matches with stipulations generally once a week. But we are competing every day. Like I said, we'd have a defensive game, a transition game, and so on. But they would be games more sort of plus or minus scoring, or games to 15. And so on. So we're really trying to get them locked into the concept of competing every day. But as far as actual challenge matches, garnet and black team type scenarios, that's going to be about once a week.
Okay. And Josh, are you similar, or what's your?
Yeah, depending on the phase that we're in, we play a lot of sets. We play a lot of sets. There's objectives inside sets. But some days we just let the boys lace them up and get after it. And there's always something on the line. There's got to be something on the line to create that intensity. But the actual challenge system where we're challenging somebody for a lineup spot, we set up right off the top that's not happening. The coach is making the lineup, and there's a lot of different reasons for the coach making the lineup, and most of the time it has to do with development and where they're at and what they need to see. So if a kid's about to make a jump, we're going to push them up a line if we can, if the rules allow it, to get a little tougher competition to really break through. And if a kid needs a little more competition, we'll throw them down. But that lineup is strictly the coaches and the coaches only. So, but we do expect that intensity from every one of the sets the guys play, for sure.
Okay. And back to you, Josh. How often do your teams lift with a strength coach in the fall and spring?
They go 3 times a week in the gym in the fall, and twice in the spring. We've got one recovery day, but that's not including that straight strength and movement in there. And we'll do on-court conditioning, and we'll also do bikes 2 days, 3 days in the fall. So it's a full load.
Okay, Kevin, similar?
Yeah, one thing I would add to that, it is pretty similar. We do a lot of bikes. I mean, Josh and I think do conditioning or at least cardio exclusively on bikes. We have first beat set up, and it's kind of like Orange Theory, where we have our tiles. We know where everybody is in terms of workload at any given time. The one thing I would add to that is when we get into the SEC season, this was sort of a new trajectory for us a few years ago, where everyone was still kind of like working hard every single day. You take your day off. We actually got a lot of congruent with the year that we made a big break within the SEC was this idea of taking 2 days off per week. And the reason behind that was we were getting home late Sunday night from a road trip. We'd get out, they'd be off Monday, but they'd be in class at 9 a.m. And so by Tuesday morning, they're not recovered. I mean, recovery is physical. It's not just physical, it's emotional and mental and so on. And that was sort of, that would mean we'd only have a couple days practice before going to the next match. But we got a lot of positive response from the girls, not just in terms of talking to us about how much better they felt, but also in terms of results. I used to think that recovery was kind of like one of these politically correct things, and that was, oh come on, I was an old school. But once we started getting data in 4 or 5 years ago, and once we started seeing results from the recovery, I mean, it's just been extraordinary. So the one thing I would add is we also do yoga twice a week, try to get into a little bit more of a mindful disposition because they're always running. Let's take a moment, focus on our breath, focus on our bodies, focus on flexibility, focus on our, breathing. Routine is a big part of our in-between point routines is a massive part of our program, and that's a time to sort of recalibrate your system so you're ready to go up to the line and play the next point. And we found that yoga helps with that as well.
Great, Kevin. Thanks for that. Kevin, back to you. What areas do you score for the ranking during the Cauldron period?
We score everything. I mean, we score serving spots. We want them to get much more specific in terms of spots as far as serves go. A lot of times these programs get out there, they get the bucket, we're going to hit serves, and you have 4 kids standing around a bucket, and they're just kind of talking about last night and just serving aimlessly. And we want to put out slappies or there's court markers, make sure that they can hit the first serve, second serve exactly where they're intending to with the right spin, the right speed. So we'll score that. We score returns. We rescore all of our games. We score our conditioning a lot of the time. We have our specific, pre-practice running drills. We call it 6-ball drill and so on. And we'll post the next day where everybody lines up in each category and then the overall score. And it is weighted a little bit more towards competitive drilling and sets and so on. If anybody is interested in seeing an Excel document when we have that, just contact me. I can pass that on to you as well. But we like, and they get into it. Targets in hitting in our warm-up targets. We have something called the Kleister's drill where they have to hit in specific parts of the court so many times. People get out there and they're hitting and they're thinking about their technique and they're thinking about their side of the court, and I don't feel good. And meanwhile, the ball is landing 5 feet inside the service line over and over again. That's just mind-numbing to me. So we try to get these kids thinking about what their ball is doing much more than what they feel like a lot of the time.
Right. Josh, how have your philosophies on player development, practice planning changed as you progressed there?
Sorry, you broke up there. Can you repeat that?
How have your philosophies on player development and practice planning changed as you have progressed through your career?
Oof.
Changed?
Yeah, no, they've completely changed. I think they should change. As a player, as a coach, you're held to the same standards as your player, right? I mean, you learn from your actions. Every year we review what went well, what didn't go well, what you want to keep, what you want to throw out. And sometimes you throw out some stuff that should stay in there, and sometimes you keep stuff that shouldn't be in there, you know. But every year that we go, I do a massive reflection at the end of the year. Typically in the summer, after a few weeks away from the team and a few weeks from everything, I go back and get all back into the weeds of it. And so, yeah, the philosophy has absolutely changed. Early on, when I started the program in South Carolina, it was 1,000% culture. It was 100% everything about it. It was down to daily practices. Individual development was a byproduct of our culture, and that was it. And that has stayed through, because I just walked into it. I was like, look, we got to get our culture in. We got to be able to create a good environment. But out of that blossomed the standards of personal development as well, and then kind of started marrying the two together. And now we are where we are today. But I've thrown out so much stuff that I've put in over the years, and you know, and I get some of these alumni that come back and they're like, oh, you guys still doing this? Oh, that was so tough. And I'm like, no, we threw that out like 3 years ago. And it just is the way it is. That's a natural evolution of anything, right? I mean, you whittle away and you try to get down to the good stuff, and you keep what's super important. And I've also allowed a lot more creativity and personal creativity with my guys as of in the last 3 or 4 years. You know, there were a lot of hard lines that I wasn't moving on, and there were just maybe a few too many. And it worked for a certain group, but not a lot of guys, not the majority as they kept on coming through. So I had to kind of go boil that down into what were the fundamentals of the things that we were putting in place, the very, very core, and get them down to 2 or 3. And that provides the umbrella for our guys to really have a creative expression underneath that of how they want to become that high level person or high level athlete. And everything just kind of flows from there. If you wanted to kind of like a hierarchy chart, it kind of just everything comes down from a couple of principles.
Okay, Kevin, would you have a similar approach or anything to add to that?
I actually don't. That's pretty good. I mean, I've changed. Like I said, I mean, we change every year. We're a little bit nimble. A lot of the system is now in my head at this point, and sometimes there's fluidity. The team isn't where I think they should be given our rigid programming, right? So we actually will backtrack a little bit and come back, but we certainly reevaluate. The one thing I think we do a lot is add drills. When I see a drill that I really like, or a competitive drill, or discover a new drill, we'll add that in, and we'll add that into the system. I think we all, every year I make the promise that we're going to do more with serves and returns. We use a lot of ball machines in our program, and we use the return machine. I just don't think I do enough still. I still think that we've just got to get more specific with the serve and the returning component of it. And every year it just, sometimes that gets lost in the shuffle out there. So that's probably going to be something I'm going to really try to jump into next year a little bit more, and just keep pushing that.
Okay. Kevin, this question is for you. For programs that only have one coach, don't have facilities, how would you observe run practice for 8 to 10 girls? The individual attention and development seems to be a struggle at times in this scenario.
I would, to be honest, I would minimize in that scenario. I suspect I would move more towards a team practice, competitive scenario that I was talking about, that has sort of global rules, standards that Josh was talking about. I would build a meeting culture that instills every day what the objectives are. I would make sure that the concepts, the basic concepts, the team concepts are out there: intensity, consistency. The reality is, Josh and I were talking about this recently. I think the women's tennis, and this is my opinion, at the college level is a different game than the women's tennis at a pro level. I think on the men's side, pro tennis is more a sort of more of a linear progression from college to pro. But I think a lot of times it's a different game on the women's side. And there's a lot to be said for getting the ball in the court. There's a lot to be said for working a little bit harder to get that extra ball out there and digging it out and having that fiery component between your teammates, the intensity levels. And those are things that you can convey in team settings, and you can hold the girls accountable and the girls can hold each other accountable. And that will, as a matter of utility, as a matter of like, how do I get the most bang for my buck over this number of kids per unit of time? I think that's where you're going to get it. But I would suggest that you have at least one individual a week, not only to talk about her game and not only get you guys on the same page, but also to build the relationship. I think it's important that you have these individual relationships with the kids, that they have trust in you, that they know you're on their side, and they have you to themselves for a moment there. So that's probably how I do it. I'd probably do one individual a week and then really stress the team side a lot more.
Okay. Josh, how will the whole COVID-19 situation impact your preparation early in the fall? Talking about time needed to progress into more intensity, higher workload, etc. Have you given any thought to that yet, Josh?
Well, I mean, not really, but I mean, I can answer that. It's, you know, like we do anything. We have certain guys that come back after playing a full summer and they're in shape, you know, and whatever. So normally there's guys are coming back in different levels of fitness at that point and being played in. And that's where you have to be you got to go with kids' gloves as a coach. You know, if you go too hard, you're going to injure people. And, you know, you can either have a stance of, as a coach, which I used to, of just saying, look, on this date, you need to be up to speed. And if you're not, then obviously it's showing that you're not dedicated to the progression of the program, and on, because we are on a schedule and we're moving. But, you know, kids have gotten hurt that way because they're physically not up to speed, and that is a choice. And so there's a byproduct of that, you know, they may not be on that team after that following year. But, you know, so moving into this fall, we would have to go step by step and really take an assessment of where each guy is. We'll probably run VO2 max tests. We'll run fitness tests, very small. We're not going to push guys past anything. Obviously, we use the first beat. That's going to be a very, very important part of it. And all that does is it gives us an overall weekly training load, and we can assess where they're at. And the last thing you want to do is break a kid. So I don't think we'll end up changing much. We normally allow about a month of progression, and we slowly work guys back in. And I think that's probably where it is. I mean, right now, most of our athletes are doing a pretty good job staying on what they're, you know, on the workouts in the summer. And some guys are saying they're in better shape than they were during the year because they got nothing else to do. So yeah, I don't think it's going to change a whole lot the way we progress, but you definitely don't put the pedal down to the metal right off the bat. That'll break people.
Okay, Kevin, I think you talked about in the first question about your 4-to-1 ratio, or was that you, Josh, or Kevin? Who talked about the 4?
I think we both use that ratio. Yeah.
Yeah. So how does intensity look like on the 4 days that are supposed to be less intense? Can you give some sense of what the days look like?
It changes from week to week. I would say the way to think about that would be we try to get the real intense day early in the week, so that we can, you know, mini periodize up to the weekend when we're generally competing, right? So if we were to go very, very hard on Monday or Tuesday, Wednesday would be much more about concept. Maybe we'll dive into a doubles day where we're working on server's partner, where it's not so taxing, and, you know, as far as the doubles portion of our practice, so it's not so taxing, but it's very specific and mentally requires you to do some work. So we can dive into like a real specific footwork pattern, which we use for poaching and so on. Maybe we would do a serve +1 drill. So hitting your serve to a spot and looking to elicit a specific type of return so that you can use your weapon to hurt. So just a 2-shot sequence. Serve, here's the forehand I'm looking for, inside out forehand, 1, 2. How many of those out of 10 can we do? Having discussions. Maybe it would be individual, working on a volley. But just organizing practice such that you use, I call them more of the mental days, where you're just working on simple things without the physical taxation more than anything else, just trying to convey things that way. And then slowly by Thursday or Friday is you want to get what we do by Friday. Let's say we're competing on Saturday, is we start opening things up, and then on Friday we'll go medium, or Thursday medium, but that's a day where we're going to start adding a little bit of fun into practice. To be honest, we're going to get the girls feeling good about themselves. We have a whole series of group games that we play. One's called Nasty, one's called Olympics, and they just love competing, and they stop thinking and they're just looking for the ball. When they get to that place where they're just looking for the ball and they're in a good place and their subconscious is kind of taken over, they're not analyzing things too much, and that just kind of is a freeing thing. But generally, I mean, the way to look at it, I think, is you go hard, you go light the next day, and you go medium, or medium hard, medium, something like that, going into the week, going into the next day, the competition weekend.
Okay, Josh, back to you. How much time do you spend individually with your players? Is there a difference in workload and focus on your freshmen, sophomores versus junior, seniors?
Not really. We don't look at it as years. I mean, there's freshmen that will progress through our phases quicker than some others, and then we still have sophomores that are still stuck, and we're pretty rigid. I'm rigid. I'm not going to start working with you on certain things. I'm not going to get technical with you until, like we talked about before, I'm not going to be able. So individuals for freshmen and guys that are stuck in that first phase of creating that mentality, learning how to compete and learning how to really get external more than internal, that it's all going to be more about competing. So we are always doing about 2 to 3 individuals a week. And they're not necessarily super intense. There are times for that. Our team practices are more intense, but our individuals are much more of a walking through situations. We're competing, we're talking, we're stopping points, we're saying, okay, we're here, I was feeling this is what maybe needed to happen here. It's this score in the game, this is what we need to see kind of moving forward from here from you. So this would be a great time to play a little more aggressive or whatever. So, there's not necessarily according to year, it's more according to progression as far as the difference in what we're bringing to the table with players. But most of the time, as they get older, it gets a little less intense. The more they progress through their levels, it gets a little less intense during individuals, because it's like we talked about before, it's the gains are very finite. It's not about the intensity. It's not about the mental capacity at that point. Those are all things that they're bringing to the table every day. So at that point, that's consolidated. It's who they are. And now it's more about, hey, we need to work on this, the on the move forehand, cutting off that court, and we're going to rep that out a ton. So it's very low impact, and it's very, very intentional training as they progress through. Early on, it's all about creating those standards, and there's a lot that goes along with that.
Okay. Kevin, how do you measure the emotional tank to grow and give their emotional energy to the task at hand, and their ability to work on their recovery emotionally?
That's a really very, very good question. And a lot of our energy is focused on that. I mean, one of the earlier questions about being stuck, a lot of times being stuck to me is a function of anxiety. And this when we get into the philosophical parts of our program, we talk about anxiety a lot. Josh has mentioned the word intentionality a lot, and the idea that so often when people are stuck, they haven't defined who they are, where they want to go, and how they're going to get there. And this sort of gets into what I was talking a little bit earlier about routines. So we have to define who we are, where we're going, and how to get there. And we have to be able to develop the tools to move through anxiety and move into an uncomfortable place to grow. And on the emotional side, obviously we deal with that a lot in in team settings, and we have to vet those emotions. We have to allow them to come out, and then we have to develop the tools by which to move out of that situation where you're stuck emotionally, so that you can grow and align your actions with your goals. So so much of what we see, I remember Ingrid Martins is a good example. She spent her sophomore year so completely in her head and so self-critical. And a lot of these kids are getting so much what I would call toxic feedback in their lives through social media, a lot of times from their family lives, from their friends, and so on. And they're consumed by that dynamic body image. And what we're trying to do is to convince them to take responsibility and to take action for the direction that their lives are taking, and tennis is a manifestation of that. So we talk a lot about that, and the foundation of that is routine work. And we talk a lot about morning routines. That was something that Ingrid and Paige, who were both emotionally challenged, Paige Klein, another All-American player, they were so stuck in their situations emotionally that they had to develop tools to get out of that, take risk, take chances, take responsibility, have the courage to be intentional. And a lot of that does start with routine work in the mornings. Hey, set up your plan for the day, wake up, what are your goals for the day? Adhering to the standards when you come to practice. So when we talk about the culture, a lot of times these kids come to practice. One of the reasons we meet every day is they're all coming from different perspectives, and they're meeting on the court, and they're talking to each other, and they're stuck in their particular situations. We bring them in the meeting room 15 minutes before practice and let everybody kind of get to the same page and start thinking intentionally about what we're going to do for the next 2 hours and why. And once they start to come to practice, I guess this happens a lot of times their sophomore year, somewhere in there, and they really are tired, or they're really down about something, and they're really just not in the appropriate place to be intense in practice. We always use those as sort of benchmark days, because when we show them that they can actually, if they just get over the hump, they can actually get to a place of intensity and they can beat their emotional situation, then they're putting a check mark in what we talk a lot about is self-efficacy, that you can override your situation if you are intentional enough. So it's very much a process. It's not easy, but it requires a lot of communication, a lot of goal setting, a lot of routine work, and a lot of intentionality. You know, on match days, both Ingrid and Paige, by their senior years, who both very emotionally struggled throughout their career at times, would wake up in the morning of match day, get into the fitness room, write out their objectives for their matches, write out their objectives for the days, get their routine on the, you know, whether it's the treadmill or so on, stretch, have their headphones, and that'd be in the morning. That'd be at 8 a.m. or something. Get to bed the night before, watch. And so all of their actions are in alignment with the goals that they've actually set for themselves. And that it is a long process. It's a really good question. I would love to chat more about it, because it's really a massive part of the challenge that we have, I think, as coaches.
Yeah, well, Kevin, maybe we can do a follow-up at some point just on that point, especially for like this came from a male coaching a women's team, you know, and I think that's something that those coaches need a lot of help with. But Josh, back to you. How do you deal with a bad apple player at practice, someone who's bringing down the level of tennis or energy of the team at practice?
Yeah, we call it putting them on the clock. So we'll keep an eye on him, and we'll give him about 2 minutes, and then I'll walk over. If he hasn't, you know, he knows I'm staring at him. He knows I'm watching every move that he's making, and then I'll put him on the clock, and I'll let him know. It's like, hey man, you're on the clock. You got 5 minutes. You got 5 minutes to work right now, and you got to show me that you're going to be there. And any slip up from that point on, you're out. And so if he can't get to where he needs to get to in 5 minutes, he's gone. And it's nothing personal. There's no anger, there's no frustration from the coach. There's nothing involved in that. Today is just not the right day. Today it's for whatever reason you couldn't work through. That's the expectation, is you always finish better than you start in our program, every practice, every match. And ultimately he just didn't have it in him that day for whatever reason. And then we'll follow up with the meeting after practice, and he's going to hang, and he's not allowed to be out of practice. He has to go get in the locker room or the lounge and hang in there, and he has to sit in it. And he has to sit in it, and most likely he'll start thinking about it. A lot of times he's exhausted. A lot of times there's a fight with the girlfriend. A lot of times he's overwhelmed with tests, and he didn't communicate properly prior to practice to the coach that, hey, I'm fighting this today. I'm going to need a little encouragement, a little help, a little bit of push from my teammates. So with that, it's really simple. We have a standard set, and we are not going to allow anybody to contaminate that. And it is nothing personal. And our very best player that's ever played for our place, for our school, has sat out of practices as well. And like we said, it's nothing personal. I learned that from my father. I mean, he used to come in his camp, and there was a kid that was acting out or just wasn't willing to get better that day and wasn't focused. He just put his arm around him and said, hey, man, let's try again tomorrow. And the guy's like, what are you talking about? I'm here. And he's like, you're not here. Let's just, why don't you go hit the pool, relax, take a little break, and we'll try it again tomorrow. And that's one of the greatest parts of coaching in that sense, is that, there are standards that are set in your program, and we expect you to reach those every day. And that goes back to Kevin getting everybody on the same page prior. That's an amazing tool to use prior to practice to get everybody on the same page, explain the objectives so that focus is narrowed towards what the team is supposed to accomplish that day. And from there, most guys and girls will always be on the same page, and they'll do it. And then they feel a team responsibility. Once they get sat out, there's a little bit of a responsibility. The rest of the team goes at them and say, hey, they console them. They say, hey, what was wrong today? It brings the team closer, but that kid also has to sit in that embarrassment a little bit. I just got kicked out of practice. So, I wouldn't let anybody contaminate what you're trying to do out there. Otherwise, you're cheating the other 7 to 8 players that you have out on court.
And Josh, just a question here about Paul Jubb. So he's won the NCAA championship. He comes back to school. What things are left to work with a kid like that? After they've accomplished something like that, or around player development. Can you answer that? You know what I mean there?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. So Paul's journey, Paul is if you could dissect a progression from the day he got in till the day he left, it would be his, and just a model progression of the kid just ate everything up, got his mindset right, really got the appropriate matches to move through things. But so let's fast forward. He goes through, he becomes one of the best players. Look, he wasn't the best player in college tennis. There were probably 8 to 10 guys that are around the same level, and he happened to win a tournament that week, and was in the right place at the right moment, and was clutch enough to get through that. When a player comes back like that, there's now that one of those benchmarks of a progression is, well, now the target is 100% on you, and there's not a whole lot left for you to gain competitively. So that right there is something that is something to go gain, is learning how to deal with that pressure. And that took a lot of talking. It took a lot of like, put your big boy pants on, big guy. You're going to have to really put your hard hat on, go to work every day. Everybody's coming after you, and they're going to play your best tennis. So there was the mental side of the component where the work ethic had to match how stressful those matches were going to be. It wasn't going out there and feeling balls and hitting balls for Paul. It was 100% about, like, I need to be able to suffer every day in practice. So when I get out on the court, I'm comfortable with being in that suffering phase, whether it be mentally or physically. And that was the way we kind of trained him this last year. And it wasn't always pretty. He was struggling with that pressure that came in. But as far as developmentally, once you get to the upper levels and you're competing against a Blumberg, or you're competing against a JJ Wolf or a Nuno Borges, those guys, the differences in winning and losing a match are just a few things. And Paul was always very objective. He knew exactly, by becoming that player mentally, he started developing a great identity of how he was able to break people down, how he was able to create stress across the net. And then those guys were able to get out of that stress and beat him. And so then it was, okay, well, what's something we need to add into your game that's going to now reload that stress in, or take it to the next level for them? And for Paul, I mean, it was a year and a half of every day working on the most basic elemental stuff at net. He had no idea where to cover. He had no idea. His technique was all busted up on the forehand volley. And he really had no feel about where to be. And it was such a negative, neutral mentality that he had when he came forward as, oh, just go ahead and pass me. But that was the next level. And to beat a guy like Nuno, to beat those guys, you have to let them know that you can finish, and you can finish very, very easily. So that right there was something. Once he went out to Wimbledon and he got there, it was another great arena for us to look at and say, okay, well, this is now versus the top 100 players in the world. How are you going to compete against them every day? And where were you struggling? So we looked at a lot of the stats, a lot of the matches, and a lot of it came down to the fact that like he needed to get a bigger serve and a better serve, but really a better serve. And so we added a little bit of miles per hour, working on that, and started fitting that into his game, which kind of reworked his entire, the way he looked at the game. Is that now he was getting a lot of short plus ones right off the bat, and he's not used to that. You know, he used to fight for every single point, and so there was definitely a metamorphosis in his identity as far as growing into more of a professional level player of it's okay to miss a little bit more, and that identity had to change. So that was a different shift. But you know, like I said, I don't believe in ceilings. There's always things you can work on, and once you open up something, it's a whole new world of problems, and so there's more to tackle. And so that's where he's at right now, is graduating on that next level of the game.
Okay, Josh and Kevin, it's 10 o'clock. Do you guys have 15 more minutes to answer a few more questions, or do you need to run?
Absolutely. No, I'm here. This is good.
We're good.
All right, let's keep going then. Kevin, how do you create pressure situations for your players, either during practice? It says during matches or drills, but I'm assuming they mean during practice matches and drills.
I think we do that in two ways. And the first way, which I was talking about a little bit earlier, is just when you have a competitive cauldron, when all the girls are competing against each other on a daily basis, they become very adept at that scenario and managing competition. There's always something on the line when they're competing. You're always on that fine line of tension because they're teammates. And if you can navigate that, and it's just not a comfortable place to be, because they know if they lose, for instance, if you have our 1 and 2 player playing each other in a defense game, and one of our girls doesn't particularly, she's a striker and doesn't particularly have great defense, and our other player is a great defender, that's a pretty tough scenario to be in if you're in the cauldron and you're competing for a spot. So again, Josh had said earlier, you always have to have something on the line. That's implicit when you have a cauldron where you're monitoring results every day and ranking kids. So there's always something on the line. The other is this idea of suffering. And I think so often these days we tend to cater to the particular disposition of a kid on a particular day. And part of that is cultural. Part of that is, you know, the fear of being fired if the kids run up to the AD, that pressure that we're under. That's sort of what I was talking about, moving from an authoritarian sort of, hey, he yelled at me, to a cooperative, oh, we have an agreement type of enforcement system. But you still have to, tennis and anxiety and mental suffering, emotional suffering, physical suffering, these are the things that teach you how to get better. And I think so many times we kind of fall short of that in putting them in these scenarios where they're really, really pushed to the limit, you know, up the final climb at the Tour de France. And that's really a big part of it, is getting them acclimated to that final stretch. One way of doing that, we have a drill called the Punisher, which you have to work out really, really hard. And this would be on one of our 1 days in the 4-to-1 ratio. You have to bust through so many walls to get through the physical workout, whether it be hills, whether it be in a really intense bike workout where you're redlining for a while, and then you immediately have to go play. And then there are stipulations associated with the play. Like if you drop your shoulders for a second, the whole team is running. And or we have something called adversity cards. If you drop your head, or if there's body language, or you didn't run for a ball, or whatever it is, we have a bucket that you would reach into, grab out an adversity card, and then you would have to shout that to your team. What it could be. Maybe it's everybody has to yell "come on" after every next point. Maybe it's a running drill, and so on. But really, what it is that concept of standards that we've both been talking so much about, and that are foundational, kind of the spine of our programs, that having to maintain the standards when you are mentally, emotionally, and physically taxed. And I think, in the SEC late in March, in these long, drawn-out matches where you're having to bust through barriers, mental barriers, and you're having to be your own best friend. You can do this, let's go. The routine work associated, what are your cue words in those scenarios? You can't do that if you don't practice that. So we do try to, we have another set of drills called the ball machine, called golden drills, where you have to beat the ball machine in a match. And it's a grind. I mean, kids cry, kids break rackets early on. And by the time they've done it a lot and they get through it and they beat the ball machine, they've accomplished something. Now we're getting back into self-efficacy. I can overcome these limits that I thought I had set for myself. So that's sort of a two-pronged approach. That it's this idea of getting comfortable with suffering, learning from suffering, learning that you can be intentional while you're suffering, and this constant competition with something on the line. And those two things, those two elements kind of work together to develop our kids. The person that asked earlier, how would you work with your team, or would you do individuals? That's really the two-pronged approach I would take.
Okay. Can I use the adversity cards with my own two children, Kevin? Is that okay?
Yeah, those are amazing. They're unbelievable.
Josh, how often and how long do you focus on serve and return during a practice?
Certain days, like on our light days, it's literally the majority. So after following a big day, that's the easiest way to really work on something very specific and working in a light day physically. So we'll have big days like that on the serve and return and all positions and dubs. And then, but every day we're working, every day, even if it's for 10 minutes, even if it's for 10. I mean, it is the most important. I always build practices. So we start from just the most basic things of what we want to work on that day, and then we'll slowly build out all the way through an entire, the entire sequence of things. So starting out with just a really intentional warm up, just kind of going off of what Kevin said, most of the drills that he's creating or that we create, they're drills that where the player has to beat the drill. It's not that the coach is telling them that they're not doing something correctly. It's the player has to beat the drill. Beat the ball machine, beat the drill. Even we have live cooperative drills where they've got to put X amount of balls and X amount of targets, or else they're not out and they'll be there for 2 hours. So every day starts with that, for us personally, just to engage the mind. And then from there, we'll work on whatever we're working on, and we'll start with the ground and we'll go through. And then if we really want to work on transition for that week or whatever, the big block would be based off of that. But we're going to get in and out of that in 45 minutes. We'll have probably 2 to 3 drills. We'll build out a drill very individually with each part of that drill, and then we'll progress through. But once that drill is there or whatever we're working on, it's going to be about a 45-minute segment, and then we're going to work on the rest of it. So, and then we always put things in playing and points at the end. So if you can imagine just working through a whole menu of everything and building all the way backwards, from finishing all the way at net, all the way back to starting with a serve and return, and then putting everything into play. That's pretty much the way that most of our practices would go, probably 80% of them, just to make sure that we're covering it, because most days you get stuck with your head down and you don't actually get any of the most important part of the game, serves and returns, actually in. So it's just a way that I've held myself accountable by making sure I'm working through a progression every single day.
Okay. Kevin, can you describe film study during the season? Are you focused on what happened mentally during and between points, shot selection, positioning, patterns, all of the above?
I missed the first part of that question, sorry.
Can you describe what a film study session would look like during the season?
Oh, film study. Yeah, we're lucky that we have a kind of built-in movie theater at our facility, so we use that quite a bit. Just depending, as far as team concepts go, we'll use the movie theater. That we, whatever we're doing in terms of doubles, we'll pull up the Bryan brothers and show them specific things with doubles. A lot of our individual film review is just going to be on one-on-one meetings, and a lot of that is pattern development. I haven't gotten too much into our individual philosophy, individual development, but a lot of that is associated with around weapons and pattern development. And so we really get into the idea of how to implement your patterns, how to set up your serve, how to use your serve to set up your patterns, how to shift the court, we call shifting or counter problems, patterns, defensive patterns, and so on. So we'll get into that quite a bit. Another thing we do with film quite a bit, and it's not reviewing the matches, or if we're not reviewing the matches, we have very specific road programs. When we travel on the road for a weekend, we're going to be watching 2 videos minimum, usually 30 minutes, 45 minutes, the night when we get to where we're going, to kind of set the tone. And those will be inspirational videos. Those will be, a Michael Jordan video, even a David Goggins video, and then we'll have discussions, and then we'll follow that up with the morning with the objectives for the day and the matches and so on. Again, our meeting culture a lot of times incorporates video work, tennis, inspiration. That seems to translate pretty well to the kids who use these iPhones, and they spend a good part of the day looking at videos anyway. Sometimes if I'm droning on about, recovery footwork out of the backhand corner, it's more dynamic if I have some sort of video that captures their attention, and then they can discuss afterwards. So whatever we're working on specifically, we'll throw out there. But I would say video is not, for us, not just about film work. It's not just about the players, but also ways to keep them inspired and keep learning dynamic.
Okay. And just yes, no, Kevin, do you film practices, video practices?
Yeah, our practices are filmed all the time. This past year, we haven't done a whole lot of work with that. We had a bunch of freshmen. One of our favorite things to do, our video cameras run 24 hours a day. One of our favorite things to do is, and we do this at least once a year, is videotape everybody when we get into body language and mental skills training and so on, and have on a match day, like a Garnet Black day, and then have everybody come in and evaluate body language for each, rank them, self-talk, body language, and so on individual sheets. And then we put it up on the board who is ranked high. So a lot of times these kids don't realize that their body language is bad, or the signals are bad to their, they aren't productive to themselves or to their opponents, and they'll be last on the list. Your body language thing, then that opens up discussion. Very important part of our program is discussion and I would say conflict. We will argue a lot, and arguing in such a way that is vulnerability based, I would say, where we trust each other. We'll bring them in anytime there's tension on the team. You can bet we're going to be in a team meeting and we're going to start going at it. So anytime people aren't adhering to standards, we will, body language is a standard on our team. Self-talk is a standard on our team. So anytime people aren't appropriately going about their business with their body language, even in matches, if somebody's hanging their head in a match, you can bet we're going to be meeting about it after the match. A lot of times I'll run that meeting. A lot of times the girls will run that meeting without me. But we do that in practice as well. We'll kind of show it, whatever we're working on that particular day, we'll go right into the movie room and take a look. Doubles as well.
Okay. Well, Kevin, I just asked for a yes, no, but I'm glad you expanded on your answer there.
I missed that part.
I figured. we're running out of time, so I'm trying to find just a couple last questions. Kevin, a question for you. At the ITA convention, you talked about each player having a primary pattern that is based on their own strengths and weaknesses, and developing that pattern and how to get into that pattern within a rally or off the serve and return. Do players in that plan have a secondary or even a tertiary pattern, or is the focus on excelling at that one pattern?
That's a good question. Yeah. So
quick answer.
That what's that?
Quick answer here. Don't be
yeah.
dragging.
Quick answer. Yes. Secondary, because a lot of times your primary pattern plays to the strengths of your opponent, and they can beat you at it. So you're going to have to figure out if your secondary pattern can beat their secondary pattern in that situation.
Great. Kevin, another question. Sorry, we're running out of time here, so I'm going to try and get a couple more. If you play on Friday and Sunday, what day do you take off, or what days do you push hard, medium, light, Monday to Sunday each week during regular season? So which days do you take off, like Friday, Sunday is the first question.
It depends how taxing those matches were. And so if the Sunday match was very difficult and we're in the SEC season, like I said, we might actually take 2 days off and have no hard days. The hard days for that week were the Friday. Well, if it was a hard day, let's say Friday, Sunday, that's like a bike race. You're going to go do a bike race on the weekend. It's not like you're going to take 1 day off and do a bike race again. We'll start the periodization and the build up. So Friday, Sunday in the SEC is always a real taxing scenario. That's your workload for the week. So we would not do anything hard during the week, and we would open things up in terms of getting the spirit of the team in the right place to compete again. If it's a light match Friday, Sunday, or we're out of the SEC season in February and we play on Sunday, we'll take 1 day off, and our hard day would be Tuesday.
Okay. And then Josh, last question. Do length of practice change according to intensity? So I guess, yeah, you could have a lighter intensity, but go longer, right? I mean, how does length and intensity, how do you weigh those two things up?
No, we're pretty strict with the length of practice. We give the objectives leading into practice, just like Kevin does. We meet prior, and the things that we want to accomplish that day, how the practice should flow. But there will be times where we don't move through something. If we don't get through the practice, we don't get through it. But we have a 2-hour window that we go, and I believe in that. I mean, we have gone longer because of certain scenarios or whatever, but the majority of the time we have a strict 2-hour window. And the point of that is that I don't want my guys pacing. I don't want them pacing themselves. I want them to know exactly what is expected of them, and to know exactly the length of the practice, so they know how it's going to flow, and they can go 100% locked in, and they know that there's going to be an end. If you don't provide an end to them consistently, then you're going to get a lot of guys bringing 60, 70% on most days.